I'm Julie Bartkey with this Senate update. On Monday, House and Senate Republicans stood together to announce a transportation funding package. The dollar amount is in line with the Senate DFL and the governor's plans, which would bring in roughly $6 billion over 10 years, primarily by increasing the gas tax at the wholesale level. The GOP plan would raise $7 billion over 10 years by creating a transportation stability fund. It uses these existing revenue sources that currently flow into the general fund. The dollars would be redirected to these 5 different pots and would raise more than $3 billion over a 10-year time frame. The rest of the $4 billion comes from using trunk highway bonds, relying on the Department of Transportation to realign resources, and use bonding and general fund dollars. We caught up with the chair of the Senate Transportation and Public Safety Committee, Scott Dibble, as well as Senate Minority Leader David Hann to get their thoughts on this proposal.
It's interesting that they call it the Transportation Stability Fund. That's clearly an effort to deflect the obvious criticism, which is that these revenues simply aren't going to be stable going on into the future. That's the conversation we've been having about whether or not it's appropriate to use general fund sources for transportation or not. In years past, the legislature has attempted, in lieu of providing the stable source of funding in the form of dedicated transportation revenue, gas tax, motor vehicle sales tax, license tab fees, providing some general fund resources for transportation. The problem is that in subsequent years, when there's been a downturn and a lot of pressure and competition for resources in the general fund, out of which we pay for public education, higher education, medical care for senior citizens, public safety, helping make sure our property taxes are a little lower, those become the priorities, and the commitment to transportation is reversed quite swiftly. And we know that'll happen again in the future. And so I'm glad that the Republicans are stepping up and they've acknowledged the size of the issue before they were saying, well, we really don't have that much of a problem, we can wait. So I'm really, really happy we're entering a discussion about addressing the identified need. And now we're going to have a discussion about how we pay for that appropriately.
And let's talk real quickly about your bill. It passed out of your committee last week. Discuss a little bit on the key differences in your opinion.
Well, we like I said, we devote resources that can be more predictable over the long-term basis and won't come into direct competition with children's education, with senior citizen health care, that sort of thing. So we raised the gas tax in the form of a sales tax on the price of gas. We raised license tab fees a little bit. And we pay for transit in the metropolitan area through sales tax in the metropolitan area, which is the way other regions around the country pay for their transit on a stable, secure, ongoing basis. Unfortunately, the Republican plan doesn't provide any resources for our transit system that we need to develop to accommodate over 500,000 people who are coming to the metropolitan area in the very near future.
Senator, it's been said repeatedly by yourself and by Senate Majority Leader Tom Bach that your plan would be a hard vote. Anytime you increase taxes, it doesn't always look doesn't bode well with the public. So given that the GOP has come forward with this plan that doesn't essentially raise new taxes, do you think you can sell your plan?
Well, we've done it before. It's very difficult, there's no doubt about it, but we're elected to really lead, and this is the kind of thing we do for the coming generations. We are living off the generosity of generations that preceded us, and they took tremendous political risk, and they invested in a prosperous Minnesota with a strong infrastructure. We've been living off of that generosity for years. It's our turn to step up and maintain the system that we have, improve it, and set ourselves for prosperity for the coming generation.
Finally, Senator, the two plans are vastly different. This has been called the transportation session. Is there any way to reconcile these differences? Will there be a transportation funding package at the end of session?
Well, I get up every day with a sense of optimism and a sense of possibility. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't feel like we can't do good things together. I feel like it's been a good session. It hasn't been acrimonious. There's been a fair and respectful, vigorous debate, and I think that is the ingredients that we need to get something done. It'll be a compromise, no doubt, in the end. We have to do that. That's the way the system is designed to work. The problems that we've had in the past is a failure to compromise, government shutdown. I don't think we're on that path this year.
There's been a lot of talk in the last few months about the need for a gas tax to fund transportation. The governor's been out for months And the polling we saw this morning shows that the people aren't buying it. They don't want to see a gas tax. I think what the Republican plan shows is how to get dedicated money for transportation without a gas tax, and I think it's going to be very well received.
Senator Scott Dibble, the chair, says that this is not a stable source of revenue. Your thoughts?
Well, it's as stable as what the governor is talking about. I mean, in the course of the legislature, there's nothing ever permanent. The governor wants us to pass a bill to put a gas tax in place. There's nothing to say that a future legislature could come by and undo that tax, so that's not permanent any more than ours is. We're talking about making a dedicated source of funding from existing taxes that would have to be undone by a future legislature the same way that the governor's would have to be undone if that were to happen. So we think that both plans are equally permanent, if you will, and all they are choices that legislatures have to make about what their priorities are.
The DFL also says that this plan essentially siphons money from schools to pay for transportation. Is this plan using shifts and gimmicks, which is what the response has been?
No, that's just a complete distraction. I mean, budgeting, when you have a budget, you make choices about how to spend money. If we're going to now call budgeting an exercise in shifts and gimmicks, then why do we call it a budget? Why don't we just call the whole thing a shift? I mean, you look at what the governor's choices are in his budget. He's talking about spending money one place rather than another. Do we call those shifts? Should we call them shifts? We had a education shift that actually took money that was going to be paid at one time and shifted it into another biennium. That's a legitimate shift. Everybody calls it a shift. But if we're going to call the normal practice of budgeting a shift, I think the Democrats are crazy to do it, because then everything is a shift. What we're talking about is making a priority choice to spend money on transportation, just as we make choices to spend money on education and health care, all the other things that we do.
Senator, I'm going to conclude the same way I concluded with Senator Dibble. How do you reconcile this whole idea of gas tax or no gas tax? Will there be a transportation funding package this session?
Oh, absolutely. There will be one, and I think the way to resolve that is very simple: no gas tax. People don't want it. The legislature doesn't want it. I think even Democrats are leery about passing another huge tax in addition to the one they passed 2 years ago. I think we're going to get a transportation bill done. I think it's not going to have gas taxes in it.